Hello and welcome to the podcast Real Talk with Eddie Cara. I'm your host, Eddie Cara, and today it is the first episode of our brand new season number 2, and we've got David Bruno with us. How you doing, David?
Very well. Nice to be here. Thank you.
No worries. So let's begin asking, what do a sci-fi empire, Quebec politics, and the Supreme Court of Canada, and potentially the Quebec National Assembly have in common? I would say that they're fighting over the same thing. Who actually holds the power and who gets the final say?
I love it how you put it that way. I was going to say they're fighting for the spice, but that's another story.
How spicy then? So let's start talking about what occurred with the Air Canada crash that occurred on Sunday, March 22nd. And then we'll talk about the upcoming Quebec election and the polls and what the issues ought to be, followed by the CAQ's leadership race that's ongoing right now and the first debate that took place. And then we'll talk about something quite on people's minds right now in terms of the Supreme Court of Canada. The Bill 21 is being heard and argued in the Supreme Court as we speak. So we'll talk about our thoughts about that and what to expect. And lastly, our final segment will be about Dune 3, which is coming out on December 18th, 2026. And the recent teaser trailer was released just 3 days ago. So without further ado, let's begin. The latest controversy regarding the Air Canada crash is following the accident that occurred at the New York airport, where we had 2 deaths, as well as more than 40 passengers injured. And the controversy is such that its president, Michael Rousseau, started giving a video message, right? It was not even a press conference. And basically, he began by saying, hello, bonjour, right? And then he started speaking solely in English, giving a video message of condolences regarding what occurred. And he also added the French word merci, by the way, throughout the 4-minute video. He did face a lot of Quebec media in terms of not having any French message, a line or two written for him by the Air Canada staff per se, or their press team, right? Yes. And he's been in the past quite vocal quite open about the fact that he does reside in Montreal, but at the same time, he does not speak much French.
Yep.
Right? That's usually code for does not speak French. And then they involved the Quebec Premier, François Legault, who's outgoing, right? It's his final few months, who actually asked for the president of Air Canada, Michael Rousseau, who made this video condolence message, to resign. And this was also followed by the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, having to comment about it, where he called this a lack of judgment and a lack of compassion, actually. So what are your thoughts about this entire situation that's occurring?
There are two major thoughts that I'm having at the moment. The first is how we have an administration in the United States that has, and their way of doing politics has led to a shortage in their own space when it comes to the air traffic controllers. That's the beginning of the problems right there, because as I was researching how they're going about doing things, they have government shutdowns. What government people in Canada do not know, most of the people that I speak to, what a government shutdown is. In their system, they have to have both houses sign off on the money bills that pay for government services every so often. And if they don't do it, there's a standoff. And while that standoff occurs, people don't get paid. That's a government shutdown. So now we're in another government shutdown, another restriction on these people that had, first of all, had led to an overworked staff that has gone to this tragedy. Then And what I'm trying to say is that their tragedy is affecting us now, for first and foremost, because that flight came from Montreal. Then we have Monsieur Rousseau, who, for not a first time oopsie daisy, for a second time made only English comments and has been relatively apologetic, but in a way that just doesn't make sense. So, I mean, I've lived in Quebec many years, and I understand the Montreal nuances, which I have lived from my own experience. For example, there's something wonderful that happens to many Anglophones that do understand it. A lot of Quebecers, if they hear you speaking in English, they'll understand you, and they'll speak to you in French. And then you can speak in English, and then there's going to be this exchange. Any Ontarian listening to that would think, oh my God, how disrespectful. The guy understood what I was talking about, and he refused to speak in English. Well, no, that's not really how Montreal culture is, because there is a blending of the two, and that's a nuance. It's just a different nuance. So maybe Monsieur
Can I
Rousseau,
just yeah, can I just interject just to inform our listeners and viewers what you meant by the oopsie daisy that occurred in the past, right?
Right.
So in 2021, he made a speech to the Montreal, it was almost like probably like 90%, it was reported that it was in English, to the Montreal Chamber of Commerce. And as we know, Montreal is in the Quebec province. So therefore, the official language of Quebec is French. Okay. He did apologize the next day when he made that mistake. And he also promised the public that he would improve his French and take hundreds and hundreds of hours of French classes, which he reportedly has taken. And the reason the backlash occurred back then, this was in 2021, as I said, is because Air Canada is an ex Crown Corporation of Canada, right? And obviously, fast forward to when some more things happened, and then the Canadian government had to sell its shares, about 6% of its shares into Air Canada, as a form of divesting, because they were quite angered about some of the things that
don't get us started
and
with
the
all
price
the
hikes. 100%. Oh yeah, there's always bailouts. Trust me. Fast forward to what's happening right now. And the reason why this is in the news is because Quebec Premier's François Legault's stance that sort of propagated the series of events that are being discussed. What's not being discussed is why the accident occurred, the investigation, and how could we improve the situation. And instead, he artfully made this in a very coordinated fashion into a language issue, which throughout his last 8-year mandate, he has successfully done so.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost as if he is leaving politics, even after there is his successor, who will be the one of the shortest tenures of a premier in Quebec history, I might add. Whoever's his successor, he will stay on as an M&A till the election occurs, and till then he will be quite irrelevant in the news. So this is a form of him conveying his last hurrah, showing his relevance and trying to imprint in people's minds as a lasting impression. Yes, he is the one who's standing up for the French language and preserving the language.
Let me stop you there. I would hardly call this. No, this is not a standing up of this. This is. Let me explain, because a lot of people are saying, "Who cares?" And I want to just give my 2 cents on and compare them to other CEOs. Okay, this is not just a protection of the French language. This guy has been put there with a very important job, and has now slipped up of the French language in a society and a constitution of Air Canada for the second time. Now, for someone who just got a $12 million package and just last year was awarded another bonus of $2.4 million, I want you to also now look at another CEO that had another oopsie daisy moment where you have to look at them and ask, how does someone who's supposed to be so smart got into a position that is supposed to be for someone who's really smart that made a juvenile mistake. And yes, I am going to say juvenile mistake. Why? Because why hasn't anyone stopped him or done even the part in French? Okay, the other CEO I want to point out that is, supposed to be smart that did another oopsie daisy was the Weston family, Galen Weston, when he was directly asked from the NDP when he's in committee if he would answer 2,000 emails and danced and danced and danced and danced instead of grabbing the report and saying, for the billions of dollars that I make, of course I'm going to answer those emails, and then set them down and move on to the next question.
The Weston family, though, is not the same as being in charge of Air Canada.
I'm giving an example of a very juvenile mistake, of something that could have been resolved almost to the letter for the amount of money that they're making. That's it.
Well, look, let's just for a second take the perspective of Mr. Rousseau here. It's not the first time he's making errors like this, right? However, I mean, he is taking charge by himself posting a video message. It could have been written for him on a teleprompter, but for some reason, apparently it was not. Did it need to be him? It could have been his press liaison officer or whomever is responsible for communications at Air Canada.
Two pilots. It had to be him.
Right. So, yeah, in a way, it's good for him to take initiative despite his French proficiency. But at the same time, he took quite a risk. And in defense of him, it needed to be him and not just somebody who's a press officer or press secretary to convey this condolence message, given that there are not just injuries involved in this crash, but also fatalities, two deaths, right? At the moment, from what we know. We still don't know exactly like the results of the investigation. It's ongoing, and I'm sure that's what they'll say to till we get further notice about that. On the other hand, do we want someone pretending to know how to speak French well by reading off a teleprompter?
Yes.
Having a script.
Yes.
Would you prefer that?
Yes.
Okay. I still think. Look, I'm quite indifferent about that question, but in terms of Michael Rousseau's gaffe here, I don't think it's a huge issue. And the reason is it's because it's the act that matters in this circumstance and the fact that it's a national tragedy. Now, if it was just another crisis without any fatalities or injuries, it was not a crash, right? Then I would be in agreement with most pundits and commentators who are saying he should have actually added at least a minute-long speech in French. But I think given that there are two deaths and it's a national situation, it's quite tragic. I would say, in my view, I'm willing to give him a pass. I do not agree with François Legault that he should actually resign over this. I don't agree with the resolution that was passed in the National Assembly in Quebec to forcefully condemn his actions and to make him resign. I don't think that's how it works anyways in a private corporation.
No, I'm not surprised that the Assemblée Nationale would do that. But my only point to that is, after all these years and after all your money that you're making, I don't give him a pass. Or does he forget how much money he makes compared to the national average?
Right. Well, look, I think in terms of him resigning, it's going to be a personal decision.
Oh, I don't mean that.
Or it's the board of directors. It's also the other option is the board of directors that takes a vote to fire him. It's the shareholders wouldn't really get involved.
I'm not calling for his resignation. Just produce
okay. So
video.
what say you? What's your final take on the matter?
Hurry up and produce a video.
You don't think it's too late?
No, I don't think it's too late. Just hurry up and do it. It's better late than never.
Okay. All right. So I guess stay tuned. Those are our takes right now regarding the Michael Rousseau situation with the LaGuardia tragedy that occurred, and what we think about François Legault's request uh, as his last hurrah stunt.
Yeah,
Let's talk
well,
about the upcoming Quebec elections this year in 2026. So the writ is expected to be dropped at the end of August, and it is going to be called for it to be either in mid or end of October of this year.
mhm,
It's literally months away. So a lot of things have happened just in the last few months, literally in Quebec politics. Okay.
mhm,
So the Quebec Liberals have a new leader now, Charles Milliard, whom I'm happy to say that I supported and I had the pleasure of voting for him last year when he was first running.
mhm,
And I think he's a fantastic leader who's also classy. I kind of see the similarity between him and Mark Carney a little bit. They're both like poised, elegant. You know what I mean? They're smart, they're intelligent, they know what they're talking about. We have also a brand new poll that came out, which show the PQ at 31% and the PLQ at 30% for the first time ever in a long time.
mhm,
And that hasn't happened in a while, compared to the polling in January showing that the Parti Québécois losing 3 points at 32%, while
mhm,
Liberal Party of Quebec rising 6 points with Charles Milliard at its helm
mhm,
to 26%. And now, fast forward like 2 months later, it's 31 versus 30.
mhm.
So, and then the CAQ went to fourth place, and the Conservative Party of Quebec is now in third place, oddly enough. So, what do you believe is attributing to these poll number shifts? And what do you foresee the issues to be in the upcoming election?
My main take on the subject is the inconsistency of the Parti Québécois, because as as you know, and as I'm sure the viewers know, the CAQ has been notoriously nationalistic with no referendum as part of their as part of their platform, or as what they are as a party. So that went to their favor. Quebecers in general, from my point of view, have wanted nationalistic policies, but don't really want to talk about separation. Okay, so now with the meteoric fall of François Legault, now we have to think about him and his popularity bringing down the party with him to a certain degree of percentages, and that has also led to a shifting of the support that was on the CAQ side from most of the population to that of the Parti Québécois. Does that mean that they're separatists? The answer is no. So now that we're seeing the new leaders of the Liberal Party take the helm, there's been a new shift, and that shift has also been coming from I would say good marketing, reminding Quebecers, do you want another referendum? Is this where the direction that we're going in? An understanding that a lot of Quebecers look at their vote as nationalistic and not necessarily as a sovereignist vote, and that is shifting the polls. And I think I'm going to
Hmm.
predict that those polls are going to shift even further for the Liberal Party.
I think there's quite a few factors. Okay. So, number one, there has been a massive shift ever since the previous Quebec Liberal Party leader, Pablo Rodriguez, did resign after weeks of scandals, right?
Mhm.
Regarding those brownies and the fling flang text messages and all that. It's now the Quebec political landscape has experienced a massive shift, right? With the CAQ collapsing from third to fourth place, still predicting zero seats, even though I suspect they will win a few seats, right?
Yeah, I'm
Um,
not sure about that. I think those
yeah,
polls
it's
are
too
off a little
premature
bit.
for that. But
Too, yeah.
we've turned the Quebec election into, instead of one party, the Parti Québécois, solely dominating in majority territory, now it's become a two-party race once again, kind of like the Americans, right? But
I would say so.
we have a huge difference, which is this time around, it's still quite a highly fragmented electorate. Uh, because in our Quebec system, any party can win a majority government should they get minimum 30% of the popular vote, right? And of course, because of the fragmentation, so the split among the other parties. The Québec
Yes,
solidaire is shockingly doing very poorly.
I'm not surprised.
Right? So they're not helping with this massive shift. Actually, one might say the left voters who are leftists and also who are for a referendum uh, are traversing into the Parti Québécois territory or likely to, right?
One hundred
Uh,
percent.
but I actually don't think it's going to be a majority given the current polls. There's a lot of factors. There's, first of all, I'm a firm believer that federal politics, whatever occurs federally, transfers into the public perception provincially. So, and also the party identities also transfer. So the Federal Liberal Party of Canada, people have a psychological way to relate it to the Quebec Liberal Party, even though they are separate parties and quite different
I
at
would
times.
disagree with that on another day.
Sure. Okay. Uh, Now, what's happening is that Mark Carney is our prime minister with the current trade war that's still ongoing with the Americans, followed by the Israel-Palestine war that's also occurring, while also having this war in Iran occurring. Uncertainty is at an all-time high. And
Hmm.
what's very unusual is while economic anxiety existed in the 2022 election, it's much more heightened now
Hmm.
than it was in 2022.
Yes.
Economic uncertainty, prediction of recessions, uh, gas prices being quite high and keep rising, right?
Hmm.
As well as cost of living and affordability issues still surmounting exponentially, I would say,
Yes.
and still not being addressed by the François Legault government, by the way, in a much more successful method at all. It seems like they haven't even tried tackling it. They've had so many scandals. So, what do you think the issues are going to be? Let's say top three or four issues in the Quebec election.
I'm very familiar with the healthcare situation in Quebec as it is part of my consultations, and I can tell you that there's a lot of room for improvement. And we've noticed that doing healthcare in Quebec is very complicated. We can't just bring up American doctors. We can't just bring over other Canadian trained professionals. It's just not that easy in Quebec. So, I mean, from our point of view, that's a solution that can be an overnight fix, but it's just not being done. So then the next question is, how is it deteriorating so badly if Quebec is one of the highest um, paying provincial jurisdictions when it comes to healthcare? So clearly there's a problem. And so that is front in mind right now for all Quebecers. Those waiting lines just don't go down. Then apart from that, clearly the American situation is weighing heavily on Quebecers because that's affecting manufacturing as we speak in Montreal especially. And so protecting those jobs is going to be a number one priority. And I don't think Quebecers are going to care who's going to help them out as long as they help them out. So we are looking at an aerospace industry that employs tens of thousands of people. And so far, I don't hear it. Have you heard anyone speak in that directly? I mean, that might be a federal issue because a lot of that is going to be in military procurement. But I mean, those jobs are being held with a thread. So I'm not sure if that's going to come up as the number two or the number three issue. Those are my thoughts on the surface. Those are the lowest
Okay.
lying fruit.
Okay, so in my view, and it's already been the case in the last 2 years at least, uh, mainly being driven by François Legault as well as Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, the leader of the Parti Québécois. Um, it's going to be, as history keeps repeating itself in Quebec, almost every 10 to 13 years, I would say, independence, so referendum, number one.
Okay.
Interestingly, similarities occurring in Alberta, ironically, but at a much lesser minority rate. Um, I would say immigration is going to be at the forefront. And the reason being, it's because the Parti Québécois is going to differentiate themselves by promoting the notion of referendum even further with this notion of we need less people here, basically.
Hmm. Sure.
Um, Whereas the other parties will talk about specific numbers of people they're willing to accept, which I think is a little bit of a mistake because it becomes quite technocratic. People
Yeah.
don't like too much policy wonkiness, right? Um, and I do think the cost of living, which is once again so far an ignored issue, uh, going to be at the forefront, even though politicians will try to talk about more like education and healthcare, right? Which is always at the top of people's minds, but like
Mhm.
it seems like all the parties seem to offer quite similar stances with regards to how to solve it, and whenever a party is in power, it doesn't usually get solved the way they're predicting, right?
I,
Um,
I agree. There's one thing that I love talking about when it comes to immigration is it's outright hypocrisy when it comes to how it's dealt with in Quebec, where 80% of all francophones, or they have the right to have immigration of 80% of all francophones, and yet they'll put a limitation on it. So then the question is, when it's put to them about the declining population, and the answer to that question, as it is with every other province, is to increase population growth and therefore immigration. And yet, as soon as you say those words, it becomes a taboo. We don't want them more, but so I find it hypocritical. And yes, it'll probably come up, and yes, they're going to dance around it like they always have. But is it really? Is it a real priority though?
we'll let voters decide that one. But at the same time, one of the key interesting facts about this upcoming election is it's the first time that almost every single party will have a brand new leader, right?
Okay.
And the only returning leader that has of a party that has seats in the Quebec National Assembly is literally going to be Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, right? The
Sure.
others, like it's going to be Charles Milliard, it's going to be Guillaume Clichy-Rifard and Ruba Gazal for the Québec Solidaire. Then we have for the CAQ, there's a leadership race going on right now. It's either going to be Christine Fréchette or Bernard
Mm.
Drainville,
Yeah.
and so
I
on and so
actually
forth.
think that works to everyone's advantage, to be honest with you.
Well, yeah, it's a little bit of a refresher, right? The only outlier in this equation, that is not getting talked about enough is the Conservative Party of Quebec, right? So,
Agreed. Yeah.
right. So we don't know, like last time they lost their momentum after the debate performances when Éric Duhem, their leader, who's still going to be the leader, um, promised to have a Trump-like wall built at the border of Quebec just to leave immigrants out. That was quite ridiculous thing to say. So people started comparing him to Trump and then losing interest, right? And Trump isn't liked in Quebec as much as he may be in the other provinces on top of that. So people forget that in politics, especially seniors do not like Trump in Quebec
Mhm.
from the majority that I've spoken to, anyhow. That is a perfect segue to our next topic, the Coalition Avenir du Québec. So we call it the CAQ, uh, leadership race that's ongoing right now. Well, did you know we had an ongoing leadership race for the CAQ? In case you did not know, I'm here to inform you with David about it, right? So it's been an ongoing process in the last like 2-ish months, and it's set to be held on April 12th of this year, right? So in about 2 weeks, right? Following François Legault's announcement that he is resigning, and well, he's caused a lot of the problems, I would say, even though he's taking the blame for it. Like I think he was forced and pressured to, and it was just about time because, you know,
Okay.
he saw for 2 years, he said, I'm going to keep running, I'm going to keep running. And journalists kept asking him the same question, are you going to keep running? But at the same time, it's like, things haven't changed. Take a hint, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, so in terms of the leadership race, we have Christine Fréchette.
Mm-hmm.
who is the former immigration minister, and most recently, she has been the Minister of the Economy and Innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And then against her is the second candidate, who is Bernard Drinville, former Parti Québécois MNA.
Mm-hmm.
He became a CAQ MNA, and he was beforehand the Minister of Education till
Yeah.
2024, I believe. And
Yeah.
then he succeeded to being the Minister of the Environment.
Yes.
Okay. Now, throughout this race, it's been quite interesting. I think it was quite a distraction from the Quebec leadership race that only had one candidate in the end, Charles Milliard.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm very happy Charles Milliard is the new leader. I'm a huge fan, and we both voted for him. I know so. Sorry to spill the beans. I didn't know if you wanted it to be public in your case. So we have on one hand Christine Fréchette, who's a little bit of a moderate technocrat, who's the former immigration minister, and then she became the Minister of the Economy and Innovation. She likes to focus, and this was an issue. She focused on her approach to decision making in the first 2 weeks of the campaign, during which journalists commented a lot about. Her focus is much more on economic management, how she makes decisions, her competence and experience, and how she wants to ensure stability in Quebec. On the other hand, you also have Bernard Drainville, who's much more of a populist,
Mm-hmm.
whose focus is much more on nationalism, and his
Mm.
messaging is much more nationalistic as well, tone wise. And he likes to focus on identity politics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, as I said, he's much more ideologically a populist compared to a centrist technocrat. So, that's the choice between the two. A very interesting duo, quite a duality, I would say, for the CAQ members to vote, because the CAQ has not been known in the past in terms of its brand, shall we say, to being an ideologically extremist or populist party, right? They've
I
been
would beg
much
to
more
differ.
focusing on the economy, moderate, and
I would beg
sort
to
of like
differ on
the
that one.
sovereignty light party,
Okay, I
right?
would beg to differ on that one. I would say that was
Okay.
precisely how they came to pass was populist, and I wouldn't
Yes, but
call.
that's not how they're governing. That's a key difference. Did you also know that there was a first debate that occurred literally last Saturday on March 20th, right? And there's going to be a second leadership debate for the CAC on March 27th.
Mhm.
Today, we'll be talking about the first debate and some moments in the race. Okay, so let's start by talking about the race itself for folks to be recapped on a little bit, right? So early on, polls suggested conducted by Leger
Mm.
that Christine Fréchette was the favorite. In fact, she has gotten um, much more endorsements very early on than Bernard Drinville. Bernard Drinville got 15 so far. But Bernard Drinville has been very effective at driving the campaign message and forcing Christine Fréchette to sort of defend or elaborate on what her position is publicly, right? So several times he's done this. Has it actually reflected into the polling? Well, let's look at some of the polling right now. So,
Right.
and fast forward to the latest poll conducted on January 29th of this year by Ligier.
Mhm.
Among 134 CAC supporters, 59% for Christine Fréchette, Bernard Drinville 22%. Here's the caveat to this. Um, 5% preferred another candidate, while 14 chose not to answer because they don't know or just refused to answer.
Yes.
So, in my view, 98 to 134 CAC members being polled is insufficient given that they have more than 5,000 members currently that will have a vote in the
Mhm.
leadership race.
Mhm.
So it's quite uncertain. Who do you think is going to win in your view with the information that I've just given so far.
I really don't want the information. Okay, so I
Mm.
actually don't want to make a prediction because
Mm.
the polling is out to lunch. It's not usable. I
Look,
also
secretly, I think, given that Bernard Drinville has more experience, even though he's got higher unfavorable ratings, I would prefer to have Bernard Drinville as the leader. And here's
okay
why.
okay
I don't think either or of these candidates are going to cause a Mark Carney like comeback for the party. That's number one. So why? Because they're only going to have just less than 6 months to get stuff done. Will they get something done? To be seen. Highly unlikely, in my opinion, right? But are they actually going to affect the polling that we're seeing in terms of the provincial averages? That's the question. Because the outliers right now are the Conservative Party that's in third place. Uh, some of those voters might go back to the CAQ, etc. Right?
yeah
Um, but at great times of uncertainty, I think people have already made up their minds that they're not going to give another chance to the CAQ, no matter who they bring. At the moment, that's what it seems like, according to the polling. It keeps going downwards, and during a
it does
leadership
lean in
race,
that
it's kind of
direction. Yes.
stagnant usually. It doesn't go down, so it's a little bit of a surprise. It seems like Christine Fréchette is the favorite only because of endorsements and the polling. However, I'm of the opinion that the members will prefer someone like Bernard Drinville. Why? They want to have a fighting chance against the Parti Québécois specifically. And
hmm
Bernard Drinville, being a former PQ, MNA, has a better shot of taking votes away from the Parti Québécois in a chance to keep the party, ensure the party's survival, right? Um, the independence issue is going to be key also. So Bernard Drinville cannot give like a very nuanced political answer like Christine Fréchette would, right? Um, they, right now, the latest poll shows 71% are against it. So the referendum, it keeps fluctuating, but
Yeah,
the
it
most
keeps
recent
moving up
one
and down.
is only 29% for it, right?
hmm hmm
And the last one conducted by Legault. Yeah, so I don't think it's going to matter in terms of endorsements, but rather the experience is going to matter and survivability.
I'm gonna just tell you who I like.
Sure.
I'm not sure if any of them are gonna make a dent for real.
Yeah,
I
that's what I
like
said.
I like Hachette. I like a governor to govern. That's what I
Mhm.
like. But history has shown
Even if
us
it's for a
that.
few months.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I want
Okay.
her to. What I'm trying to say is, but hear me out. When it comes to
Mhm.
the election, even though they're not gonna win anything. Drainville is I mean he's an attack dog. He's almost like
Yes.
a Poliev, but Quebec style for Quebecers. So
No, no, no. I think um, if there is a politician I would compare him to, he has the potential to being the Quebec Chris Christie.
okay,
Now, normally I would say Denis Coderre would be Quebec's Chris Christie because he's known to be a pretty good attack dog, and he's not afraid to say things.
right.
Obviously, Denis Coderre is not going to be on the debate stage, right, this year. So, Bernard Drinville would probably do that against Plamondon,
I think he would. Yes, that's where I was going with that. So
not
the,
Christine Fréchette. Yeah,
the question would be, I think she would govern better, but that's my opinion. But if the question is who is going to attack the Parti Québécois and keep them on their heels, it's going to be Drainville.
exactly. Yeah. And obviously, because I'm a supporter of Charles Milliard too, call me a little biased. Uh, it gives the Quebec
He
Liberals a
makes the
little bit
party
of a
look good. I will
pathway.
give you that.
Yeah, yeah. And the more the votes are taken away from the Parti Québécois, the more of a chance the Quebec Liberal Party has a chance to gain a minority government in this upcoming election.
Okay, that's ambitious,
That
but
would
yes, with
that would be my preference,
okay.
obviously, right? It's going to be a matter of seats. Let's not forget. But
Uh,
without further ado, we let's move to the first debate that took place
Je dirais Bernard, parce que j'ai appelé les gens pour les consulter. Quand j'ai fait ces appels-là, j'ai réalisé une chose, c'est que pas personne n'appuie le tracé que tu mets de l'avant. Alors, c'est important qu'on les entende, ces gens-là. Le tracé, là, on le choisit pour eux, pour les gens qui sont ici, pas pour toi, pas pour ton ego.
Christine, je pense pas que c'est une bonne idée de rentrer dans les attaques personnelles. Je pense qu'on doit rester respectueux parce qu'on va devoir travailler tout le monde ensemble par la suite. Ce qui nous a fait mal dans ce projet-là, là, c'est le avance-recul, avance-recul, avance-recul. Malheureusement, ce que tu proposes, Christine, dans ce dossier-là, c'est un autre recul. Je suis très étonné que Christine relance ce débat. Je ne sais pas où elle était dans les années 2010-2011. Si vous me demandez de choisir entre l'eau et le gaz, je vais toujours choisir l'eau.
C'est la proposition que j'ai faite, c'est d'en discuter, d'en débattre, parce que le contexte a énormément changé. On a une volonté, je pense, assez partagée d'être davantage souverain sur le plan énergétique, d'être moins dépendant de marchés extérieurs au Québec. Alors, on a des ressources naturelles, dont le gaz, et ça mérite d'être discuté à nouveau.
For some reason, they're doing it on Saturdays. Usually it's supposed to be done on Sundays, but that's new to me, right? They're trying to do some rebranding, I guess.
Right.
So just a little bit of a recap regarding the first leadership debate. And honestly, this was a party fighting for literally survival. So was it a policy debate? I would say no. And right away from the get-go, it started quite confrontational tone-wise. So instead of talking about like what's your vision for Quebec, what is best for Quebec, it's rather it sounded like who can save what's left of the party.
Right.
Of the,
yes, absolutely.
Literally.
Yeah.
So there was like there was a lot of like friction in the air, wasn't there? Like it really felt like like let's like a little bit before like a boxing contest, right? It's not like a warm-up greeting. Hey, let's unite after this election.
But there's a point to
like
that, though, because it has a ginormous majority, and you could almost see that those are all the MLAs. That's what they're all saying. Like, I'm gonna run again. There's a giant chance I'm not going to get my seat. What are you doing about it? Was basically what I read, and that was it.
Well, I was about to say also that this felt less like a leadership debate or a race and more like where it's an urgent political meeting that we have to have a convention about. It sort of is at that stage right now. And like you can see the difficulty for both candidates, I feel, throughout this campaign. It's been very difficult for them to answer. While I think Drainville has done a better job at it, is how to keep defending François Legault's, your current leader's record, while at the same time trying to distance from it. And it's very admirable, I would say, and sometimes comical to see both of them constantly doing it, but without naming what's actually at the root of it, like what's causing it, François Legault, right? Or like the cyclic situation or the troisième lien situation, right?
Oh, right.
So it's not like none of the candidates actually talked about a grand vision for Quebec. None of them actually talked about on the stage like they're confident that they're going to win. How do we win the next election? They didn't have that message, but rather how do we avoid getting wiped out?
Correct.
Right. Right. It sort of is like that. They're not debating also how to govern, but rather than how do we survive? That's sort of the gist that I got from the first debate. So what say you, David, as your final take?
My final take on the subject. Okay, so I guess I would have to compare it to the other debates. I don't have much of an
You mean the Quebec Liberal Party debates that occurred
for example,
last year.
The last one that just occurred. And I would have to say that at least they weren't afraid to attack each other. They went after their records, and that was interesting to watch. Other than that, I don't have much of an opinion.
Basically, what Dave was trying to say is he didn't think anyone actually moved the needle or won the debate.
I would definitely put it that way. Yes, I don't think the needle moved.
Well, you're welcome for the translation, right? Right now, the Supreme Court of Canada is hearing arguments regarding Quebec's infamous use of the Charter's notwithstanding clause, which is often referred to as a sunset clause, by the way. because usually when provinces use it, it's enforceable for up to 5 years. And we're hearing arguments regarding the controversial Bill 21, which was a bill that prevented um, religious symbols, so to speak, in public institutions, in a nutshell.
Mhm.
Uh, the reason it's quite important right now in terms of constitutionally is because it's not just another lawsuit or another legal challenge, but it's actually a constitutional turning point, and we rarely have some of them pertaining to this issue. So the issue is basically regarding Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights, right, which allows provincial governments to sometimes override certain charter rights, right? Um, Particularly Section 2 and 7 to 15, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember from my law education. Okay. So oftentimes what the courts look, it goes through the court level processes. We call those forums, right? So it goes to the Superior Court and then it goes to the Court of Appeals, and now it's at the Supreme Court level, right? The question that the justices often ask and ponder about and debate about after they've heard arguments is this power to enforce the notwithstanding clause to limit or override or circumvent certain charter rights absolute? Or can the court still do something to add more limitations about its usage? So, a little bit about uh, recent history in terms of the Constitution and its use of the notwithstanding clause. So in 1988, a landmark decision, Ford versus Quebec, was established, where the Supreme Court struck down a particular law where Quebec, we noticed Quebec immediately using it to override it. And that was the precedent judicially to establish an overriding model in politics. Fast forward to 10 years later, and the secession reference, so it's the secession of Quebec reference to the Supreme Court in 1998, which introduced principles like minority protections and democracy. And this was important because it established the foundation of 2 years later what we call the Clarity Act. It was when Jean Chrétien was the prime minister. Um, Basically, it established a precedent where we had to be much clearer with the questions we ask to voters during referenda, okay, or a referendum. And
Mhm.
then fast forward to Toronto versus Ontario, where you have the courts warning against using explicit texts in constitutional documents. Okay.
Mhm.
So here's the thing, the Constitution clearly allows Quebec to use it. And what the opinion of the Quebec government typically is that the courts should stay out of it. However, there's also a precedent where the legal system should impose protections of minorities, like the freedom of expression and religion, even from provincial legislatures. Okay. So, what are your two thoughts about this entire process, David? And what do you think is going to be the likely decision that the Supreme Court will come to? What are your thoughts, and what do you think the Supreme Court of Canada will end up ruling on?
I have a
Regarding
pretty
this
good
case?
feeling that the Supreme Court is going to have a balanced take on this.
Mm,
The question of religious freedoms in this country are pretty enshrined in the Constitution. You get a sense that Quebec legislature felt that this was wrong anyway because they preemptively used the notwithstanding clause. They didn't actually use it to um, due to a court order. They preemptively set it up so that it would be shielded completely. So there is a case for contesting it and saying to the Supreme Court, this was not how the notwithstanding clause was designed. And if that does come up with the judges to rule on, then I have a pretty good feeling they're going to say, yeah, that's not how this was designed. You're using it as a weapon. But on the other hand, what's it there for if you're not allowed to use it? It's just that clear. And so I have my doubts. I think they're going to have a very balanced view, but I'm very anxious to see what they come up with.
So I'm of the opinion that probably like 75% to 85% likelihood that they will uphold the validity of using the notwithstanding clause for provincial powers. Okay, and the reason being there's already a strong precedent for its use, and Section 2 is the freedom of religion, which is Bill 21's basis, right?
Yep.
And it can be enforced legally up to 5 years because of this clause, right?
Yep.
There's also so there is legitimacy in terms of its institutional
I get that, but it's being
matter.
challenged for a reason.
Yeah, but because it's infringing on religious freedoms, I get that. But here's the thing: the Supreme Court also has the power to make declaratory statements, okay, in its judgment. So they might say, okay, we can't overturn this, like we cannot strike this down, but at the same time, they're going to say things like Bill 21 does violate the charter rights, particularly the charter's freedom of religion rights
Yeah.
in Section 2. Okay.
I think
So,
that's the approach they're going to take because they've even had
yeah.
criticism from the United going all the way to the United Nations.
Yeah, well, also we have a much more progressive. We Our Supreme Court tends to evolve as society progresses. It's not like the originalist approach that the conservative justices have in American
Right.
history and currently on the
Right.
Supreme Court of the United States. It's not the
Right.
same.
Right.
Um, Now, this basically isn't necessarily about Bill 21, but it's more about whether rights in Canada should be enforced by judges or negotiated through politics. I think that's also an interesting question to ask, given that, okay, the Supreme Court has to decide on this constitutional feature, or is
Hmm.
it actually constitutional caveat or a bug, right?
Yeah.
Um, and with us sort of talking a little bit about the courts and politics, let's segue into the futuristic politics as we venture into the world of Dune. Frank Herbert's saga
The
continues with Denis
the
Villeneuve's
final
third
episode,
installment. Yeah,
the final
which
installment.
yeah, so it comes out on December 18th, 2026, on the same day of Avengers Doomsday, by the way. And it's reported that Avengers Doomsday is going to be longer than Avatar 3, 3 hours and
Oh,
45 minutes. I
okay.
don't know how I'm going to survive watching that.
Well, because
Um,
they're avenging the Avengers of the Evangelics, I suppose.
Whatever. And this is basically where everything is supposed to tie together in Dune 3. It's based off Dune Messiah.
Right.
So basically, but it's 17 years after Paul Atreides has become emperor, and he learns that uh, gaining power might have been easy for him in the second installment, but controlling and surviving it is another matter. So in this one, well, in Quebec politics and the Supreme Court, we're sort of seeing parties fight to regain power, right, in a fractured system, and who actually controls those types of powers.
Right.
Uh, but it's not really who wins the power necessarily, but who gets to decide what happens after they do, right? So you can sort of say it like that. But one interesting thing is it's happening 17 years, so he's got a shaved head, Timothy Chalamet playing Paul Atreides. So I personally don't think he looks older as Paul Atreides, but he's supposed to have two kids that are grown up in the film. He's got twins, and one of them is Leto the Second, who's going to be vital because he ends up becoming in the books the next emperor. And he's actually played by Jason Momoa's son. Okay,
Oh, yes. Yes.
and in the trailer, the teaser trailer that dropped, you see Jason Momoa's back. But spoiler alert, it's not actually Jason Momoa's character in Dune 1 that's back. It's actually what the books called it, a Gola. So a Gola in that series is what we consider to be a clone
Hmm.
gifted to the Emperor. Okay. We also have almost everybody returning, but a new character is played by Robert Pattinson. right? Who made his career from the Twilight Saga, and he's
Oh
now
yes,
doing
of course. Yes.
Batman Part 2.
Yeah.
He started shooting that one. He was also in Christopher Nolan's Tenet and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Robert Pattinson is actually the biggest mystery, I would say, so far in the teaser trailer. Who is he? Well, he's supposed to play we call in the Dune franchise a face dancer. So you're probably asking the same question most of us are wondering about. What the hell is a face dancer, right? So basically, it's a shapeshifter in that
Okay.
series. So someone who can
I
sort
was
of
gonna
like
say
if
that
you've
sounds like
seen
an elemental
X-Men.
from the Riddick series, but anyway, sure, we'll go with
Oh,
shapeshifter.
very good example. Actually, I was also going to go on to say in X-Men, it's Mystique,
Right.
right? She shifts figures as well. She can imitate like you, for instance. So it's sort of that concept, and that's going to be
Yeah.
the biggest question mark and the biggest mystery. I would say that's pretty well kept so far.
Well, he didn't give
Uh,
anything away. He was on the late
yeah.
night show the other night, looking thinner than
Mm.
before. Also, very
Ooh.
the Twilight Saga actor
Oh, Robert Pattinson. Well, he's
Pattinson.
always been thin,
Mm, no, and
right?
he looks
No?
thin. No, he's thin. Very. He looks like a man now. It's a very interesting twist. I'm going to enjoy this.
Okay. I mean, I still think it's Robert Pattinson. Like he's still pretty goofy during interviews. So it's ever since Twilight came out, what was it, 2009 or
It was
10?
a long time ago.
Yeah. So I don't think he's aged one bit, even though he has number
Oh,
wise.
I've noticed an age difference. I like him better now.
Okay. But what were your thoughts going back to the trailer? What are you most looking forward to?
I never read the books, so I mean, as far as Easter eggs are concerned, I mean, my people that love it are just going crazy for it. So I'm just riding on their coattails at this moment. I think it was interesting enough, but I'm gonna refer to you on this one.
Yeah, so one of the spectacular things that's noticeable in the trailer is the production design, the sets. So that's always a reason to go watch it as well. And it's also the final installment, at least so far as we know, because we also know that there is a prequel series that's done by HBO called Dune Prophecy, not related to Denis Villeneuve himself.
They're very
Denis
good, by the
Villeneuve,
way. I'm
I
in
loved the
love
first
with them.
season of Dune Prophecy. I cannot wait this year for the second season to come out. Um, but Denis Villeneuve is actually gonna leave the Dune saga after the third one is released, and he's gonna be a little bit busy making the next Bond film.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to seeing how different that's going to be. And first of all, who's going to be the next Bond? Which
Oh
is a
man, we're
segment
still.
we already had a podcast episode
Yeah, we
on, which
did.
I'll add a link to if you're watching this on YouTube. So thanks everyone for watching and listening to us. That's it for today. I'm Eddie Cara, and
I'm David Bruno. See you next time.
see you next time. Till next time, folks.